dive deep into the world of UFC rankings, including the controversies and disagreements regarding their reliability. Would these rankings genuinely reflect a fighter's ability, or are there flaws in the system? The UFC. The UFC is the leading MMA promotion, with over 600 outstanding athletes. The UFC uses the renowned ranking system to assist audiences in navigating each weight class and determining which competitors are the most effective. This is a system that MMA adapted from boxing, and it works quite simply. The UFC ranking system is simple to understand. More than 20 media members from various MMA networks vote on the rankings. Each week, they vote for the top 15 fighters in each weight class. The UFC then uses their votes to determine fighters' position in the rankings. So, keep watching this video because we'll go into greater detail about how UFC rankings work. How are rankings determined in the UFC? The way UFC rankings work is quite straightforward. More than 20 media members from various MMA networks vote to determine the rankings. Every week, they vote on the top 15 combatants in each weight class. They also vote on pound-for-pound rankings to determine the greatest boxers across all weight classes. The UFC then compiles all votes and utilizes the final results to make changes to the rankings. There are no specific guidelines for how members of the voting panel should vote. The rankings are entirely personal, although they must maintain fairness. In most circumstances, fighters' positions in the rankings are determined by both current and historical results. They employ facts and statistics like victories and losses. The majority of them focus on recent fights and results, as well as the fighter's reputation and legacy. Some other factors that play a big role in their votes are the method of victory and the quality of opponents. It is vital to note that they do not vote for interim or undisputed champions. This is because the champion is unquestionably the greatest in the weight class, while the interim champ is second best. How often are UFC rankings updated? The UFC rankings are updated weekly. The panel of media members must vote and update the rankings within 48 hours after the most recent UFC event. Even if there are no UFC events on Saturday, they must vote, which is simply a formality. Here's an example of how the UFC updates its rankings. For example, say a number 8 ranked boxer faces a number 5 fighter on Saturday. If he or she wins the fight, media members will vote for him or her to move up the rankings to enter the top 5. By Tuesday, the UFC would have made the alterations, putting the number 8 rated fighter into the top 5 while dropping the losing fighter a few spots. This is a brief description of how the UFC adjusts its rankings. Who votes on UFC rankings? People who vote on UFC rankings are media members, mostly journalists, who work in the MMA industry. The rankings began in 2013, with approximately 100 journalists. In current times, this figure has reduced to between 20 and 30 people. These journalists and the networks they work for are not based in the US only. Yes, votes on the UFC rankings come from all around the world, including the United States, Brazil, Russia, and Australia. However, the names of those who vote on the rankings are not made public. Previously, the UFC published the names of all voting panel members on its website. People were able to learn more about these individuals and their backgrounds, which helped them choose which fighters were the best in the world. We could also view more details about how each panelist voted. However, when it comes to the present situation, this is not the case, as the UFC has decided not to reveal who votes on the UFC rankings. So, as a result, we don't know the names of all people who vote on the UFC rankings. Who are the media networks that decide the UFC rankings? All media members with the ability to vote work for major MMA or sports networks. These networks originate from all over the world, including Brazil, Russia, Sweden, and of course, the United States. Most of these networks focus solely on MMA. Fight News, Gazeta Esportiva, Inside Fighting Radio, Portal do Vale Tudo, Burbank Leader, ESPN.com, MMA Weekly, NY Post, Canal Combat, and Fight Network are some popular ones. How many ranks are there in UFC? The UFC rankings include all weight classes. Each weight division has a ranking list of the top 15 fighters, as well as a pound-for-pound ranking list that takes the weight out of the equation and ranks the best fighters from all divisions. Since there are 12 UFC weight classes for both men and women, there are 13 ranks, including the pound-for-pound list. What does pound for pound mean in the UFC? Pound for pound, or P4P, is a ranking list that includes only the top fighters in all weight categories. Sugar Ray Robinson was one of the first boxers to obtain this title in boxing. People referred to him as a pound-for-pound king, which signified the best boxer in the world, regardless of weight class, at the time. In modern days, pound for pound has become a part of the official ranking system in various sports like boxing, MMA, and wrestling. The Ring magazine published the first pound-for-pound ranking chart in 1990. When it comes to MMA, the UFC established the pound-for-pound rankings in 2013. However, it's worth noting that several MMA media outlets, including ESPN, Sherdog, and Topology, publish unofficial rankings. Why is pound for pound important in the UFC? A pound for pound rating list is extremely important in the UFC since it identifies the greatest competitors regardless of weight class. In certain ways, the number one ranked pound for pound fighter might be regarded as the ultimate fighter. He or she is, in most cases, the most proficient fighter, having battled and defeated every opponent in their weight class or era. These are the world's best athletes, and many consider them to be the greatest. A pound-for-pound top fighter is, theoretically and fundamentally, capable of facing and defeating opponents in all weight divisions. But we will never see this in the UFC, and these debates will forever remain without an answer. The UFC would never match a 205-pound fighter against the best in the 125-pound weight class, simply because the State Athletic Commission will not approve the bout. Instead, modern MMA fighters and boxers compete by beating each other on the pound-for-pound ranking list based on achievements and records. How are UFC pound-for-pound rankings determined? The process of ranking the best pound-for-pound boxers is similar to that of ranking fighters by weight class. Every week, approximately 20 to 30 journalists from various MMA media networks vote on the pound-for-pound rankings. The primary difference is that this list includes the top fighters in all weight classes. The pound-for-pound list often includes UFC weight class winners, as well as other prominent competitors. To determine who is the best, the panel members would look for the most dominant boxers with the longest winning streaks or the most championship defenses. They will also consider their legacy, the quality of their opponents, and other considerations, such as their level of career engagement. What are the main problems with UFC rankings? Although UFC rankings are a valuable resource for the sport, the notion is far from ideal. In reality, there are other defects with the ranking system that we hope the UFC will solve in the future. Here's all you need to know about some of the most serious issues with how the ranking system functions. Number 1. The lack of voting criteria. Don't get us wrong here. It's great that the voters have full freedom to express their opinions. However, this creates a great deal of confusion in certain situations. For example, one of the most serious issues is the number of inactive fighters. In recent years, we've seen a lot of high-level boxers take lengthy breaks. Journalists who vote on the rankings are the ones who are advocating for a change because inactivity has a big impact on the way they vote. There are no standards for how they should deal with these fighters or their position in the rankings. Number 2. Biased voting. The members of the voting panel are also fans of the sport, with their favorite fighters and those they dislike. When you combine preference with a lack of voting criteria, you get a perfect recipe for biased voting. And this has happened a few times before. The clearest illustration of this occurred immediately after UFC 194. In this unforgettable event, Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. Following the event, most journalists voted to raise the Irishman up the pound-for-pound rankings, which was the only right decision. But the panelist from Brazil, Marcelo Ruscio, actually moved McGregor down the rankings, which was completely out of line. Lack of transparency and credibility. The main issue with the UFC ranking system is its lack of transparency. We don't know who are the panelists or what their qualifications are. Some of the known panelists are very credible, like Brett Okamoto and Mace Raimondi. However, most panelists are anonymous, and fans know little about their backgrounds. Finally, the UFC rankings, while powerful, are not without issues. As the sport evolves, there is an urgent need to guarantee that the ranking system is fair, transparent, and accurately reflects a fighter's ability. At that point, both competitors and viewers will be able to trust the rankings and the opportunities they offer. That is the end of this video. What are your thoughts about this video? Write your thoughts in the comments section below. Let's meet again with another interesting video.